Well, hello everyone, and welcome to today's discussion on the economic benefits of the Affordability Connectivity Program. My name is Steve Posiask, and I'm President and CEO of the American Consumer Institute. For those of you unfamiliar with ACI, our mission is to promote consumer welfare by improving the understanding and impact that public policies and regulations have on consumers in a free market. I'm very fortunate today to have quite an impressive panel of guests. With us today, we have Rosalind Layton, a Senior Vice President of Strand Consult and visiting researcher at Aalborg University in Copenhagen. Rosalind is a frequent commenter on technology policy whose background in academic research helps policymakers understand the impact of regulation. Additionally, we have with us Randy May, founder and president of Free State Foundation, a nationally known legal expert in the field of regulation and communications policy, who has published well over 200 articles on these topics. And with that, we also have the former FCC Commissioner, Mike O'Reilly, who served at the FCC from 2013 to 2020. Prior to his time at the FCC, Mike O'Reilly spent roughly 20 years on Capitol Hill, serving most recently as the policy advisor for the office of the Republican Whip. For all of those joining us online, you can find out more about our panelists from their bios on the page below, as well as links to the recent commentary they published on the subject of today's discussion, the Affordable Connectivity Program, or ACP. Now, before we start, let me just put all this in sort of the context of what is ACP. Okay, it was created in November of 2021 as a bipartisan infrastructure investment act. It was a part of that in continuation with an improvement to the emergency broadband benefit package that was put in place during the pandemic. Under the program, qualifying households could obtain a discount of up to $30 a month and $75 for qualifying tribal lands, as well as getting device discounts, such as $100 on qualifying devices. The program, in my view, has proven to be enormously popular. Over 18 million households have signed up, which means that millions of people who could not have previously afforded broadband are working online, learning and having telehealth visits, etc. So this appears to be very impressive considering the program allocated only $14.2 billion in appropriations and relatively, I think, a small sum compared to the program of the IIJA, which totaled $1.2 trillion overall. There is one problem, however. There's a strong likelihood that without additional funding from Congress, the ACP will run out of funds by early to mid 2024, impacting nearly 20 million households, as well as the additional households of those who had not yet signed up. Okay, so that's the background on this. And now everyone on the panel has been a critical voice in the past of things dealing with fiscal conservatism and the values associated with that. But we all have, they all have voice support for the ACP. So what we're trying to explore today is why is that? The program's not perfect, but there are a number of reasons for the program. In particular, it has succeeded where others have failed. Today, we'll dive into some downstream effects of the internet connectivity and why the ACP appears to be working, and what are the potential solutions for extending it short term, long term, and if it's extended, what should the program look like going forward? So let's get on with our discussion. I'm going to ask a few questions to the panelists and give them all time to respond. So Mike, conservatives often have an inclination to oppose any federal subsidy program, like the ACP, Lifeline, Link Up, and things of that nature, right? But recently you wrote what's called the conservative case for ACP. So how does the Affordability Connectivity Program specifically align with conservative principles, and why should conservatives support it?
Well, thanks for setting the table on ACP and for inviting me, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. So if you believe that the broadband access or internet is so important to American society today, and I do, I think it is important to have access for consumers and American families. And if you believe that there's a portion of our population where cost really does matter and being able to afford broadband really does matter, that they can't make their budget work as it exists today, then there is some need for government to have some type of subsidy. and the ACP steps in for this purpose. And so I think that applies, and is compelling to all Americans and all taxpayers. But for conservatives, I think there's particular good reasons why ACP should be supported, particularly if the benefits of broadband help provide self-sustainability. You can educate yourself. You can, actually remove yourself from the current situation. You can better your individual situation and your family situation with broadband. And that's really important because it reduces the costs of other subsidy programs, such as welfare, food stamps, a number of things that the government would pay for otherwise for poor individuals, where you can betterment yourself and improve your situation. You can get out of those circumstances, and broadband allows it to happen. Employment, a lot of things that come from that, healthcare, a lot of things that can come from that service. Secondly, it provides cheaper, it reduces the cost for government services. It lowers, like I said, healthcare, lowers the cost for healthcare, it lowers the cost for publications. Lots of costs can go down from the government offering and the functions it does today by having broadband available to more people than exist without the ACP. Three, it's not an R or D issue, and it's not a red or blue issue. It applies to all Americans. And if you see how the 18 million users of the program are divided today, it's throughout. It's not an urban program. It applies to people throughout our nation that are in need of help. And that should be compelling to conservatives, because it's not just about one particular portion of the population being assisted here. It's everybody in need that distributed throughout our nation. And ACP has a very strong framework. It's a voucher-like program that gives subsidies to only those that are eligible. And Congress has the ability to change eligibility to make sure that it can tighten. It can also fix the waste, fraud, and abuse, which are natural in any program that gives out a subsidy. So you can fix and tune the program to improve it. And that's one of my favorite features of ACP, is that Congress is involved. You mentioned additional funding, but that also gives the opportunity, when you have the need for additional funding, is for Congress to come back in and provide some fixes to the program. They're no longer on self-sustainable programs. They're no longer on autopilots, as many other subsidy programs are. Here's where Congress can fix and tune as necessary. Now, there's other reasons as well. If you look at, without this program, you open up the door to additional regulation. Without addressing affordability, it basically says to the regulator, hey, costs are too, we acknowledge the costs are too high, but we're not going to do anything about it. Well, then the regulator, in my old institution, the FCC, looks upon that and says, you know what, we have to do something ourselves. Maybe we need to regulate rates under a net neutrality regime. Maybe we need to do other things to try and constrain the ability to offer services that are above a certain cost, maybe benchmark rates, for instance. And that's problematic for the growth of broadband and the network and jobs and a lot of things that come from the benefits of broadband. And my last reason I think that it's important is you have to recognize there's 18 million subscribers on this system today. By the time we get to exhaustion of funds sometime first quarter of next year, give or take, we're going to be over 20 million. And those are 20 million subscribers who benefit today. The Congress be saying, sorry about that, good luck. I know you have financial difficulty, but we're just going to let you deal with it yourselves. And that's just not a great place for conservatives to be. We talk about compassionate conservatives and trying to figure out how to provide a hand up and not a hand out. And I think that's exactly what this program does, and it's structured in the right way, and it deserves funding, additional funding from conservatives.
Wow, that's a terrific answer. Thanks so much. So Rosalind, you've done an awful lot of work on this yourself, and so can you share with me some of your thoughts on the current state of the digital economy, and what role do you think the federal broadband spending programs like the ACP do in terms of playing into its growth?
So I just want to say thank you first as we get started. It's hard to follow Mike O'Reilly. I agree with everything that he said, so I'm going to try to go in a different direction to think about this. Just take one step back. What would we as an academic framework be able to look? What's really exciting about this program is it really follows in the vein of Milton Friedman, because what Milton Friedman, who's really the founder of school choice, he said, why are we having, these decisions made by school boards? Why don't we give the money to parents? Let them choose. And that's really what goes on with this particular program. It's broadband choice. Individuals have the voucher in their hand. They choose the broadband provider of their choice and the service and technology of your choice. That also creates competition in the economy, not just competition for broadband, but competition for the different services. And I think Mike pointed out really well, almost 20 million new households getting online. That's a staggering amount of new value into the economy. Just on the top line value, what does it mean to Facebook if they get a new user? $60 a year. So already this program has been driving money to America's largest tech companies. For them, they're selling their advertising, their products and services. That is helping the economy. So that we've just been able to get people who would normally be taking the bus to go to an appointment. Now they can use their phone. They can apply for a job online. They can start the business online. They can learn a new skill. All of those things that they can do with their phone at a much lower cost and use all of the range of the amazing services and apps out there to help people improve their lives. And that is an exciting time. Through the pandemic, Americans came together. They've created all sorts of online solutions to help each other out. And now there's no excuse if you're poor. You shouldn't have to be excluded from that. You can take advantage of it. And that's what ACP does. So, there are various studies going on right now that are looking at the value. Benton Institute just published one yesterday about how people take advantage of it. And, the ripple effects, I can just estimate it's at least $150 in new advertising revenue for the large platforms. So that's very exciting, important for them. People who want to sell their goods and services, or maybe they're offering services to help people of low income, they may reach out to those users. You have something that creates competition. And then you also get, you also are using another good element about this is because, I think, as Mike said, you have congressional oversight. You have other institutes like the General Accountability Office. They have done a study of this program that's highlighted how well it's worked, because we have learned a lot from the past about past subsidy programs, which were flawed. Maybe at the time it seemed like the right thing to do. Here, you remove a lot of intermediaries. You get the money as much as possible in the hands of the end users with a specified voucher they can use for broadband. This is used for broadband. And that is what the policy goal is, to get people to use broadband, to use the variety of services to help them have upward mobility, to help them improve their life, get a job, get healthcare, work from home, learn from home. I would certainly say in my own anecdotal learning, seen many cases a household with children, there may be one smartphone in the household. And it's really important that if kids during the pandemic, for example, they needed that phone to be able to learn. And it may take too much time. I mean, who knows when we can get a fiber connection to that home, but there's no excuse to wait. They can use their mobile subscription today to be able to learn from home. And this amount of money helps those people get over the finish line to get a subscription with enough data, and in combination with the variety of programs that we have to facilitate all the things that we do online every day. And every American should be able to enjoy that.
Excellent. Thank you, Rosalind. So, Randy, let me go to you. So some have criticized federal broadband spending programs as inefficient and wasteful. So what are your thoughts on these criticisms, and how can we ensure that the ACP continues to be implemented in a responsible and effective manner?
Thanks, Steve, first of all, for including me, and thanks to the fellow panelists for allowing me to join this impressive group. And honestly, I'll never pass over an opportunity to thank Mike O'Reilly for his service at the FCC. He was one of the best FCC commissioners that I've had the privilege of witnessing over about four decades. And I'm not going to speak as long as Mike or Rosalind, so I felt I could add that at the beginning. And also, I'm not able to speak quite as fast as they do. I admire that, and they covered so much ground that I want to just take our discussion in a somewhat different direction, because I agree with essentially all or at least 90% of what they said, and so I'll just state right here at the beginning, most fundamentally, I would like to see this program extended. I think we all agree on that, and I think that's important. And for me, I consider myself a free market oriented person. conservative, although sometimes these labels are thrown around in different ways. But I'm conservative. But I've always supported safety net programs for those that I consider to be low income persons. I've done that in the particular part of the world that we inhabit with regard to the Lifeline program, for example, which is aimed at supporting low-income persons, enabling them to, of course, initially to have just plain old telephone service before broadband, and I've done that for decades when at times other conservatives didn't do that. So that's important to me, and an important element of this program that both Mike and Rosalind touched on that I think is attractive from a conservative viewpoint is the consumer choice element that accompanies the voucher, as opposed to Lifeline, for example, which worked, completely differently, where the carriers had the choice. The voucher is important. Now, I do want to say this because Steve asked me about improvements in the program or adjustments. And I've written about this, so it's not something new. I think in the context of extending the program, which I hope will be done, I think it's appropriate for Congress to look at, in my view, the eligibility level, the requirement for the income level, because in my view, it quite reasonably could be adjusted downward somewhat to fit with what I think might be appropriate. So that's one area, and I've talked about that in other contexts. The other area that I'm sure Congress is going to be interested in is trying to the maximum extent possible eliminate, waste, fraud, and abuse. It's just in the nature of these programs. I think if we're being frank with each other, and we've seen this with pandemic programs, we saw it with Lifeline before it was reformed a bit, right? Commissioner Riley, remember there was quite extensive waste, fraud, and abuse, and then there were some adjustments made. But it's in the nature of these programs sometimes to have more of that than we should tolerate. So I think it's going to be important. And in fact, I would be supportive of Congress building into the extension mechanisms for oversight that maybe, are beyond the ordinary oversight mechanisms, whether it's, a special inspector general or things like that would, be targeted at that, and that's important, not just because we don't want to waste taxpayers' money, that's important. I noted when Steve was doing the introduction, he did refer to only $14.2 billion. And of course, we all have different conceptions of what's large and small when it comes to billions, but it's not a minimal amount of money. So it's important from that point of view. But there are other reasons why I've always said it's important to try and, to the extent possible, reduce waste, fraud, and abuse is that these programs that are important, like this one, won't get extended, and they won't be sustainable over the long term unless you do that, because they'll lose public support. So I think those, reforms in those two areas would be ones that, in my view, would be appropriate for Congress to look at and indeed welcome. So, Steve, I'll stop on that note for now.
Well, let me play off of that, because I think that's a good lead into what I'd like to ask Mike here. He has kind of a unique perspective from his past experience on Capitol Hill and as a former FCC commissioner. So taking ideas such as that in terms of how we're going to make the extension work and sustainable, what are some ways that Congress and the FCC can work together to make sure that this program maintains its success?
Well, look, I think Randy's highlighted two big areas that are absolutely on my my portfolio of things that I would be working with if I were on Capitol Hill still. Absolutely, the eligibility. We've seen estimates from some companies that eligibility may be 40% of America. That's too generous, and to be honest, and it probably needs to be trimmed to reflect the fact that there's a need for Americans that have budgetary issues, but that's just probably too generous in the current environment for conservatives to support on Capitol Hill. And then the waste, fraud, and abuse. We already know there have been some instances of problems in the program, and I think they be corrected, and so they can be tightened. And Congress has that role. Like I said, the oversight function is really important. And in conducting this extension of the funding is the chance to fix those issues, and in working with the FCC. Now, in fairness, with my old institution, they often let with USAC, the FCC often let the programs run a pretty good long while without any correction, and really hasn't trimmed any spending in any of the programs. They've doubled budgets over the time that I was there against my wishes often. So the important function for Congress to kind of oversee a subsidy program rather than just punting it to the regulator and hoping things work. I mean, the impact it has an impact on consumer rates. Here we're talking about taxpayer dollars. And so we want to make sure that they're well spent. And we want to make sure that those are used for the right purpose. And so from a congressional perspective, I think that's exactly what they'll do, and look at these issues and tighten them up, but still maintain the functionality of the program. And we mentioned about the choice function. The words that I like to use, and it's technology neutral. It's an opportunity to use those dollars to whatever broadband service is best for the family and the circumstances. In some instances, it's a fiber to the home. In other instances, it's a wireless offering. In some, it can be a satellite offering. And so that's really important. And Randy mentioned some of the IG ideas that have been out there, and I'm certainly supportive of those. I really have been advocated a lot of those to be incorporated. A special IG I really thought would be valuable for the BEAD program, where we're talking about a program that's probably 3 to 4 times as large as ACP. That has potential to have a problem, in terms of its run rate and its and how the dollars are used. So I'm really hopeful that this program can be extended with some tightening here or there. And if you think about it, the eligibility is actually broader than Lifeline. And Lifeline has had some problems over the years, in my experience, both from the legislative side and the regulating side. And so I think there's an opportunity to correct some pieces of it, but still maintain the viability of the program. Okay.
I think we've touched on this quite a bit now, but I just want to see if there are any other thoughts about it. I mean, there's been a sort of myriad of federal programs that have been designed to get consumers online, right? We've mentioned the Lifeline, the Link Up, and I think we just now mentioned BEAD, for example. I mean, and I think we've talked about how the voucher system sort of benefits. It's sort of the game changer here. That is sort of why the ACP has been more successful than some of the other affordability programs. Was there anything else that anyone would like to add in terms of why this is just a better program?
Well, I would just put in, the importance of, there's more technology to authenticate users today that, I think in the past there was just too many levels of intermediaries. So the simplification is important. So eligibility is a big thing. There's ability to authenticate the person, and then the removal of intermediaries, which also takes away some of the issues of waste, fraud, and abuse. And I think, as Mike has made a very good point about oversight, because it's in Congress, you have already the people who are appropriating the money. They are able to oversee it. You get the Government Accountability Office. But I'd also suggest, even if you could put this in the Office of Economics and Data at the FCC and have an annual report to Congress. There's a lot of things to do where with existing frameworks at the FCC, that you could create better oversight within FCC, that, an annual report to the commission, which goes on to Congress, would be one way to go. So, and there's an excellent GAO report was released earlier this year, which goes into that. So it benefits from a lot of trial and error that we've had from prior subsidy programs. And we use technology to make it better. We use simplicity to make it better. And interestingly enough, was also important to get the amount high enough. A lot of the problems with our Lifeline program were the amounts were too small. You have to have the Lifeline is not only can be used for the subscription, but there's a component to buy a device. And that is, it's also important because the individual, the family, the household's going to need a device. They need their choice of subscription. And getting those things together at the right amount that's large enough to be meaningful, that is, you're getting over that critical mass that you need so that people adopt it in a large scale and that we see the benefits that we're seeing now.
Okay. Steve, can I jump in on your point here? And I want to play off of a point Roz made in terms of the value of the voucher program is getting, is removing those intermediaries, and you get the dollars going right to the families that absolutely need it. And you can adjust eligibility, as I mentioned before. But we have existing programs in comparison. You talked about how this deals with other options that are out there for affordability. We have high cost programs at the FCC where the goal is to subsidize the carrier in hopes that they would keep rates low. And we've had no proof that that's ever happened. And we also wind up in those instances subsidizing a lot of people that are receiving, the benefit that aren't in the need. There are many rich people in America, and they're getting subsidized rates today. We remove that in an ACP world because the dollars only go to those who need it, and we can find who's actually needy.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I was going to say, I actually looked at some data years ago, and I found exactly that point. That there was it was a subsidy going to businesses that necessarily didn't flow through, because when I looked at the profitability of some of the smaller carriers, they weren't in need, and then there was no proof that this was even getting through to consumers in the form of lower prices. Randy, did you have something to add?
Well, I was just going to say, well, you're right about that, Steve. I mean, that has been the case for about 30 years or so. But, I expect when Congress does begin to focus on this, I think almost inevitably will look at programs like Lifeline and ask whether, they duplicate each other and how they work together. And that'll be natural. And, that probably may be a benefit of doing that. I just think Mike's the expert on congressional. He's got the benefit of being one of the best FCC commissioners ever, but also before that being one of the most respected Hill staffers in a long time. And and I'm not a politics person. I'm just a think tanker. But I think it's probably you don't have to be into politics to know Congress is going to take probably a good hard look at this program, and they're going to have to be some adjustments made along the lines we've talked about. And I think the important thing for those that support it, like I do and like we do, is to be able to articulate fundamentally why it's important as I put it, safety net program, and have it sort of remain within those bounds, and be able to defend that, and then recognize there are probably going to be adjustments that take place. And at least that's the way I think about it at this point, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Randy. So I think I mentioned this earlier already, but at the current rate, the ACP funding is going to run out by, I guess, this time next year. So I'd like to ask each of you. We've heard a couple of ideas going around, but I just want to make sure that we've collected everyone's thoughts on how we can find some permanent funding as a solution for ACP. And so, what's your view? And I'm curious. So, anyone want to jump in? And
well, I'm doing a lot of research on this, and so I'd love to share and get my colleagues' reaction, because this is the best anti-poverty program for the money that I have seen, and I absolutely agree we need to extend it. We should not have to do deficit spending to extend it, and that has been funded through deficit spending in the IIJA. That's the first thing. So we don't want to repeat that part. The other thing is, I don't think this should be borne on taxpayers either, because if we look at the way USF is done today, the poorest people in America are bearing the cost of USF, which is a 30% assessment on top of old-fashioned telephones. So that is, what goes to Fund Lifeline amongst some other assessments. But this is not the way it should be. If you look at the definition of universal service from 1913, it goes back to the business-to-business connections of telephone companies in the old days. And the assessment to build out the rural telephony was made by companies, not households. So this was actually something that was born on the business community, not on consumers themselves. So when I look at supporting this program going forward, I'm thinking about who benefits financially. Of course, consumers benefit from going online. They get tremendous benefit. Our society benefits when people have more jobs, have education, healthcare. But the people who benefit the most financially are America's technology companies. And they have been benefiting tremendously through the ad revenue. They benefit through the free use of the wireless spectrum. They have benefited for decades from all of the subsidy programs that we've had for broadband. And they benefit tremendously now from all this money from the BEAD program and IIJA. So what I suggest that we need to do, and Commissioner Carr has talked about this, is that we need to have an assessment. We can look at a couple things. We can assess ad revenue from tech companies. We can track, what's good about this is we can track how many new users through the platforms. We know how many new people join ACP. We can look at how much revenue per user is generated in advertising. And we can go back to the platforms and say, just as you would go out in the market and acquire a customer or user, we could do the same with this program. So you have received 5 million new users a year. You can support our program, or you do it in advance or whatever. The other thing we could look at would be cloud computing. We have now 50 petabytes of cloud computing in the United States. It's a staggering number. That's quadrillion of gigabytes. We can assess that at 20 cents a terabyte. That's $10 billion. That's enough to cover ACP going forward, and it scales with the growth. So ACP is about $500 a year, or maybe give or take. But you need to think about how can we be able to cover that kind of revenue without deficit spending, without taxing taxpayers, but look directly at the companies which get financial benefit, and they contribute because they get the benefit of all the new users, as well as the significant benefits that they've had for decades of use of wireless spectrum, the broadband subsidies, and so on. So there's actually a way to do this. We have a history for doing this in the United States, where business to business connections were supporting connectivity, and other countries are looking at doing this. And it is because there has been, unfortunately, a free ride by America's tech companies, that we have a way now to recover the costs, so the most disadvantaged in America can get this basic benefit, so that they can move up, they can do better, they can get a job, get healthcare, and learn from home.
So Steve, I'm happy to jump in here, and I kind of think there's two issues. One is the short-term funding running out. Maybe it's Q1, Q2 of next year, and I tend to think that Congress needs to appropriate some sum to get us through to a new window. And then there's the longer-term reform that Roz is talking about. How do you fund it going forward? And is that part of USF reform, which she brought up some of the history there? Look, I haven't been a big fan of taxing, broadband subscribers or even the high-tech companies to fund this. They are not, I've been in favor of appropriations because of the reasons I've highlighted. You keep Congress in the game. These are regressive taxes. And the USF mechanism is collected today, equally on the poor people as it is on rich people. So, you're making, the impact on a poor person is much more than it is on a rich person. Whereas the tax code is, some progressiveness to it. So you try to adjust for that factor. And I think that matters overall. But I also think that, and everyone recognizes that any costs that are passed, that are assessed against the business get passed on to consumers in one form or another. So you're just raising costs for certain services, and you're saying, well, these are services that we like, or these are services that we think that should be paying. And if it's cloud computing, for instance, I have concerns about that. In terms of what it means for we all know that businesses will shift traffic patterns. We have a history of all kinds of traffic and charges over the years. and access charges that have been, that the companies manipulate to try to avoid these type, situations. So I don't think it's a very efficient way to go about it. I think that the appropriation mechanism is the cleanest way to go in funding, and it's a recognition from Congress that this is an important, valuable social goal that helps reduce other benefits that we pay for in other mechanisms. So I kind of think that's the best way. But that's something, as you highlighted, that's something Congress will get to look at in some respects, because the authority of the commission is fairly narrow here. They could do some things if they wanted to by themselves, but they really do need direction from Congress on where they would have to end up if you're talking about something like a high-tech fee as it relates to advertising or something like that. That's something they would have to. But I tend to believe that's a heavy lift and probably problematic going forward. But I'm willing to be convinced otherwise if Randy's got a different thought.
No, here's my thought. I mean, I think for those that are going to have the benefit of watching this, you've been able to witness good presentations as to some of the pros and cons of the idea of taxing or getting a contribution from, if you want to put it that way, the high-tech companies. And Rosalind has been an articulate advocate of that position, and I have some sympathy for it, at least as a fallback position. I understand a lot of the rationale for what you said, which is good. But I think in listening to this, what struck me is that it probably should be set aside for, or Congress probably will set it aside for really a longer term debate, because I just, as I was listening to Roz and Mike, I was thinking that if they get into that debate here, it might preclude, acting on something much simpler before the money runs out that we've been talking about, and it is subject to debate. But I've been sympathetic to what the impetus that drives Commissioner Carr to make his proposal, and for Roz. I think at this point, for whatever it's worth, I think myself, I would say I favor just having Congress make appropriations for this, so that they'll be accountable and responsible. And that comports more with my notions about separation of powers and the way the government should operate. But I understand there are countervailing arguments. People worry about, well, Congress isn't going to extend it, and then what's going to happen? And those are legitimate questions that we have to face. But I think for now, it maybe simpler is going to end up being better if they make the adjustments that I talked about. If I were.
So it sounds like short term, maybe we should be looking at general funding, but longer term, explore alternative mechanisms. But I just want to just open it up for one quick round here, because time's almost up. And so I'll let everyone have one more bite at it. So if there are any final thoughts or closing comments to make before we do close today.
Well, I'll start, because I want to just thank my colleagues. Always, I'm always enlightened. I've always learned something new. And you, Steve, and I appreciate that you are bringing this a view of a conservative consumer policy, which I think does not get as much play as it should. And I really value the work of ACI and having this discussion today. I think it is, as we've discussed here, it's fair to say that we do have a deadline, that this money runs out at the end of the year. We need to do something quickly. I think that is a very good point. The other part here is that it is teed up in this Congress of reform of the Universal Service Fund. That is long overdue. And I think Mike worked very hard every single day he was at the FCC to push that ball forward. And I don't think we should delay that reform. I also think that needs to happen. And it's an important time to think about, how do we do the contributions? What do we use it for? What programs are there? What could be done better? And also thinking about, there are pros and cons here. If every single Congress we have to ask for this program for ACP, I could see it being held up. Then we don't have it. So, I think there's something we got to do very quickly in the next quarter, make it happen. But long term, if we want the USF program, it's a bipartisan program. It's also been upheld in the courts. Then we also need to think about the long term institutional design, and also incorporating the oversight and the accountability and all of those pieces. And it's an opportunity to do that now. It's been 25 years. We need to fix it.
Okay. Yeah, I want to second a lot of what Roz said. I want to thank you, Steve, for really setting up this forum for conservatives to talk about ACP and why it's beneficial and why it should be extended. And I absolutely think that there's the opportunity and the need for Congress to provide short-term funding relatively quickly. I'll be continuing to make that case this year, and hopefully we're going to get action on the bigger issue of USF reform. I will roll up my sleeves and continue to work with anyone who wants to on dealing with it. I think there's multiple parts. It's not just the contribution factor. It's really there's a whole side on the spending that needs to be addressed. Senator Cruz raised that at the hearing in the statement, and then there's also the whole oversight and management on the USAC side that is just completely fallen down, from an FCC oversight perspective, and Congress has no visibility to that. So I think there's a lot on USF to look at, and we can figure out, as part of contributions that can be looked at, and I don't want that, and I'm happy to work on that. I also want that to distract from our work on ACP longer term funding. Roz makes a good point. It's not something you necessarily want to do every year, but it is something you can fund for a couple of years, just like we've done, in IIJA, where you can provide a couple of years of funding, and then it gives an opportunity for Congress to come back. Or it can be something where Congress, has an expiration date and requires reauthorization and activity, which I've favored in a lot of programs over my time, both as in the legislative branch, but in the in the FCC as well, that we should sunset programs and make people to come back and look and determine the viability and the value of the programs going forward. So I think the same, for ACP is absolutely worthy, and it's an opportunity to look at other programs that we've been supportive. I've been supportive of Lifeline over the years, but if you look at it, there's, it's now we have a duplicative program in terms of how it fits with ACP, and I think there's there's an opportunity to migrate Lifeline subscribers or to end Lifeline. So I think that's all valuable and can be done by Congress as it looks at the bigger picture after it provides some type of short-term funding increase.
Steve, Mike, you and Roz are so smart, and when you've had your say, you don't leave that much that I want to say, because you said it well from your perspectives on all those issues, and I agree with it. So what I would say, in ending it, is that I'm going to roll up my sleeves as well. I'll roll them up. I'll roll them up right now, and I think because I've been working on USF reform or advocating it. I didn't have the influence that Mike has had, but I've been advocating that for probably 2 decades. I want to keep doing that, and it's a long-term project, but it really needs to be done to make it comport with proper notions of government and separation of powers and all of those things. And then, but in the short term, I think we're all agreed, we're going to roll up our sleeves and try and get the ACP extended, and recognize there probably be some adjustments, and as long as they're not out of bounds, I'm going to continue to support the extension of the program. Thanks,
Okay.
Steve.
Well, so let me just take a moment right now just to thank all of you for sharing your time and sharing your expertise today. I really do appreciate it. It was just terrific hearing all your insights on this important broadband program. So in closing, thank you all. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.